It was late at night when Stephen found himself sitting quietly at his kitchen table, gazing into the empty darkness beyond the window. The city outside was hushed, except for the occasional breath of wind that brushed the curtains ever so lightly. His hands were wrapped around a half-finished cup of coffee that had gone cold long ago. He wasn't really drinking it anymore. He was holding it like a delicate anchor, something to keep him fastened to the present moment. But his mind had already wandered off. It was drifting through years gone by, moments that might have unfolded differently, choices he could never undo. Regret has a way of arriving silently like that, slipping into the room without warning, pulling up a chair and refusing to leave. For Stephen, it all began with a single thought. If only I had. If only I had. Those 3 words opened, a doorway to an entire gallery of scenes he longed to repaint. The job offer he turned down because it seemed uncertain. The friendship he allowed to fade because he was too stubborn to reach out. The words he never spoke to someone who mattered and now never could. It's strange how the mind works. It can replay the past in such sharp detail that it feels even more vivid than the present. Yet all that replaying changes nothing. Philosophers have wrestled with this condition of being human for centuries. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." In other words, we may act with intention, but those intentions themselves are shaped by forces outside, our control, our upbringing, our fears, our limited vision at the time. It is only after a moment has passed that we step outside of it, as though looking at a painting from a distance, suddenly able to see its flaws. And yet, when we stood, before the canvas brush in hand, we painted as best we knew how. Stephen's mind kept shifting between what was and what might have been. He thought about the nature of regret itself, how it is not simply sadness about the past, but a collision between memory and imagination. Regret is born when we envision an alternate reality and convince ourselves it would have been better. This is why regret clings so tightly. It feeds not only on what we remember, but on what we can imagine. And imagination, unlike history, can be endlessly perfected. Friedrich Nietzsche had a complicated relationship with the very idea of regret. In his concept of eternal recurrence, he posed a haunting question. If you had to live your life over and over again, exactly the same, for eternity, would you embrace it? If the answer is no, then perhaps there is something in our way of living that has not yet aligned with our deepest values. But Nietzsche also warned against drowning in endless what-ifs. He urged us to live in such a way that regret loses its hold, not because life ever becomes flawless, but because every decision, even the broken ones, becomes part of a whole we can affirm. Stephen wasn't sure if he believed in eternal recurrence, but he knew he wouldn't want to relive some of his days. And yet, he also understood that those very days shaped the man sitting in that chair tonight. Without mistakes, there would be no wisdom. Without failures, no resilience. Still, that didn't make the ache vanish. As Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. The past cannot be rewritten, but the way we carry it forward into the present that is still within reach." The more Stephen thought, the more he noticed a strange duality in regret. On one side, it can be a cruel teacher, reminding us, sometimes endlessly, of our flaws and missed chances. On the other, it can also stand as proof of a life fully lived, a sign that we dared to choose at all. Regret means we once stood at crossroads. It means we were alive, enough to act, to risk, to fail. Psychologists often say regret is more about inaction than action. In the short term, we regret the things we did that went badly. But as the years pass, it's the things we left undone, the letters never sent, the adventures postponed, the words left unspoken, that haunt us most. Stephen felt that truth deep in his bones. He could still remember the feeling of standing at certain thresholds in his life and stepping back, telling himself there would be another chance. There wasn't. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, once advised, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." The Stoics saw regret as wasted effort, a fixation on what cannot be controlled instead of what can. For them, the present moment was the only true arena in which life actually unfolds. Stephen began to wonder if perhaps his task wasn't to erase regret at all, but to use it as a compass, one pointing toward what mattered most now. He thought of a line from the poet Mary Oliver. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Regret, in a peculiar way, answers that question in reverse. It shows us what we wish we had done, quietly revealing what we value most. If we listen closely, regret doesn't just speak of the past, it whispers guidance for the future. The night grew even quieter, and Stephen's coffee had grown entirely cold. Yet something inside him felt warmer now, a faint ember of acceptance. Perhaps regret is not a shadow to chase away, but a lantern to be carried carefully, illuminating the path ahead. It cannot rewrite where we have been, but it can light the road to where we might go. And still, even as Stephen sat with this heavy stillness, there was an odd, almost delicate beauty in it. Regret was no longer only an enemy. It had become a map, a faint blueprint of the person he could still grow into. He began to understand that regret is evidence that we care, proof that we once carried a vision for our lives. And perhaps, if we listen carefully, it's also proof that the story isn't finished. Psychologists describe something called counterfactual thinking, our mind's capacity to imagine alternate versions of our lives. It's the same engine that fuels our ability to dream, to create, to innovate. But it's also the engine that torments us with endless what-ifs. Stephen began to see how profoundly human this is. Every artist who ever stared at a blank canvas, every parent who wished they had spoken one more gentle word. Every traveler who wonders about the unexplored road, they all carry this same engine inside their minds. Nietzsche once wrote, "Become who you are." At first, Stephen thought the phrase sounded strange, but now it made sense. Regret, in its rawest form, is a signpost pointing toward the parts of ourselves we have yet to bring to life. The missed chance to say, "I love you," is not only a wound, it is also a reminder that love is still possible, still urgent. And yet, the mind resists. We want to erase regret, but maybe erasing it would mean losing the very lessons that make us wiser. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, urged us to look at things clearly and know them for what they are. Regret, then, is not a curse to escape, but a mirror to hold up, even when we don't like the reflection. Stephen remembered a woman he once met on a train. She had been silent for most of the journey, watching the rain trace, patterns on the window. When he finally spoke to her, she said something that stayed with him forever. "I think we spend our lives either trying to get back to a moment or trying to undo one." At the time, it sounded poetic. Now, it felt like truth. Psychologists often say we regret inaction more than action over the long run. The missed calls, the unsent letters, the conversations left unfinished. These grow heavier with time because there is no final closure. The door never slams shut. It just stays, half open, always inviting us to image what might have been. But hidden inside this weight is also a form of liberation. If our deepest regrets are about what we didn't do, then perhaps the remedy is simply to act. To make the call, write the letter, take the journey. The future is not immune to regret, but action at least gives it shape. It transforms the hollow ache of what if into the solid memory of I tried. As Stephen walked through this, understanding, he began to sense a subtle shift. Regret stopped being a weight, dragging him backward, and started to feel like a quiet companion walking beside him. A companion who, every so often, tapped him on the shoulder and whispered, "Don't miss this." Camus once said that autumn is a second, spring when every leaf is a flower. Regret, Stephen thought, might be like that too. A second chance disguised as loss. The life we have may not be the one we once imagined, but it is still life, still full of things to do, words to say, people to love, and so instead of trying to silence his regrets, he allowed them to speak. Some spoke in sorrow, others in longing, and a few even in gratitude. Gratitude for the mistakes that had taught him gentleness, for the failures that had taught him strength, for the silences that had shown him the weight of words. By the time he looked up from his thoughts, the day had shifted. The sun, lower, the air cooler. He realized that time itself, the very thing that makes regret so sharp, is also what allows it to heal. Perhaps we never truly erase regret. Perhaps we simply carry it. But like a stone in the pocket, it becomes smoother over time, worn down by the friction of living, by the daily act of trying again. And maybe that's enough. Because in the end, the life worth living isn't the one without regret. It's the one where regret doesn't hold us still. The one where we look at the missed chances, the wrong turns, the unspoken words, and we say, I will not miss the next one. And for the first time in years, Stephen felt not the weight of what he had lost, but the pull of what was still possible. That's the strange thing about regret. It never disappears. It only changes its weight. Some days it is light enough to carry in a pocket, a gentle reminder of what once might have been. Other days it presses heavy against the chest, each breath tightened under its force. But in that ebb and flow, something unexpected emerges. You begin to see how regret reshapes you. Not always in the cruel way you fear, but sometimes in a way that makes you softer toward others, more forgiving of their hesitations, more patient with their delays, because you know what it's like to live with the ache of if only. And when you see someone else standing at the edge of a choice, hesitating, you would almost want to take their hand and say, please, don't wait too long. Not because they can escape regret. No, one can, but because you know what is lost when someone trades the unknown for the false comfort of standing still. Life moves, with or without our consent, and the moments we wait too long to seize, they don't circle back. But here is the truth no one tells you when you are young. Regret and gratitude can live in the same room. You can mourn the path you didn't take while still loving the one you're on. You can wish something had gone differently, while understanding that without certain mistakes, certain delays, certain wrong turns, you wouldn't be the person you are now. And sometimes, you wouldn't have met the people who matter most. Philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." That may be the most honest way to hold regret, not as a curse, but as part of the map. A mark on the chart that says, Here you turned left instead of right. Here you stopped instead of going on. And with enough distance, maybe you can circle those marks, not in shame, but in recognition. Some regrets will soften into stories you tell with a wry smile. Others will always sting, no matter how many years pass. But both teach the same lesson. The most dangerous thing is not failing. It is never trying. And if you are still here, still breathing, still capable of wanting, then the door is never fully closed. Regret may be permanent, but so is the possibility of change, and maybe, just maybe, the life you feared was already gone might still be waiting for you. One decision away.